Welcome back to the Gunners Club for another exciting episode.
You're here with Gunner, of course, with Seuss. We're very happy you're here with us today. Now, what makes someone great? What makes someone the best?
Good looks?
Well, when I went and saw Paul McCartney in concert, I was front row, and I spent about 3 hours just watching him, studying every motion. When he'd pick up a guitar, when he'd put it down, when he'd get something ready for the next piece, when he'd look across to the people next to him and thinking, what is it that separates him from everybody else on stage? Because he's the show. Everybody else is basically supporting him and making him great. What makes people great?
Well, talent's important.
Talent's something, but talent doesn't count for very much. I've been lucky enough to recently read a book called Outliers, which talks about exactly this problem. Now, an outlier is something which is so far outside of the normal field. When I was a statistician, we used to look at the things that would fit the model and say, okay, we've got the model. And they'd say, no, you don't understand. The model is probably the least important thing of what you're looking at. The things which don't fit the model. That's what you've got to pay attention to, because something very special is going on there. We go so far as to do the model and then wash out all of the errors that don't fit it and then specifically study those. Let's talk about music. So let's say you've got a lot of violinists who are studying at the Conservatory of Music.
Okay.
You know, some of them have studied and played violin a great deal. I'm talking about 4,000 hours or so, and that's a lot of dedication. Some of them have done, let's say, 8,000 hours, and some of them 10,000. Now, the sad truth is that no matter how talented any of these people are, the people who have played 4,000 hours are not going to be good enough to play professionally as musicians. Doesn't matter how talented they naturally are. They are going to be the music teachers who teach your kid in the school how not to be good enough. The people who've done 8,000 hours will be good. They'll be very good. You probably won't know the difference between them and the people who are truly great, who have done the 10,000 hours. The people with the 10,000 hours by the age of 20, they're the ones who are going to play in your symphony orchestras. Those are the people. What it's been discovered, particularly with things like music, there is no natural talent. There is no natural greatness. There are people who can pick up an instrument and work out what goes where and get the love to do it and the drive to do it. But if they're not playing those 10,000 hours, they won't get there. How faithful is this rule? It's so faithful that even if we look at the compositions of Mozart, someone who is recognised as a child prodigy, doing stuff like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star at the age of 5, for example.
Yep.
That was him. If you look at his works, it wasn't until he'd attained roughly the 10,000 hours of studying and writing in music that he was actually starting to do stuff which was above his peers.
Okay. So it's repetition and almost muscle memory.
I'd say it's slightly different than that. And actually, I've got a gig in a couple of weeks. I was playing and mindful of my answer to you now. Practice should be mindful practice. So you're actually practicing with a purpose and not necessarily just doing the same thing, but something new to actually learn. So practice has got a perfect for it. In martial arts, we're always taught that practice doesn't make perfect, but perfect practice makes perfect. You've probably heard that before as well. Getting back to Paul McCartney, Seuss, I know you'd rate McCartney, wouldn't you?
I'd say he's fairly well up there, for sure.
Yeah, I think so too. People talk about the Hamburg. I'm talking about that northern German city of Hamburg, the Hamburg Crucible. The Beatles actually ventured to Hamburg, I think it was 7 times in the space of a couple of years.
very early Beatles years.
The space of a couple of years. And during that time, they were asked to play 7 days a week, sometimes up to 12 hours a day. Now, for me, that's a shock because in 1964, when the Beatles played in Melbourne, their concert was 20-something minutes.
Yeah.
It's almost nothing. But effectively, rock and roll was a new thing on the scene. And what they had to do was lure people into the bars in Hamburg and do that by playing music and having an endless repertoire. So you couldn't play like they did in Melbourne, only a handful of songs, you had to have an endless repertoire of songs. Some were jazz, some were skiffle, some were rock and roll, some of them were old-timey, probably even German Schlagermusik, stuff like that, to get them in. People think that the British invasion, which was spearheaded by the Beatles, and the Stones came over, and that essentially it was a new thing. It was a new sensation. It wasn't. By the time the Beatles played for the first time on the Ed Sullivan Show, they had already played 1,200 times. 1,200 times! Can you imagine a band that had played 1,200 times in the space of only a few years? Just how much better they were than everybody else? There was no contest whatsoever at all. The 10,000 hour rule had already been truly smashed by the time they got to that.
Yep.
So what makes someone great? Perfect practice and perfect opportunity to do that is certainly one of the things. But there's certainly a few more things behind that as well. Let me tell you. I met a young man the other day, and he'd only started his professional career, and he looked me in the eyes and he gave me a firm handshake. Can I say this to you? If you've got children, have a listen to what I'm going to say, because I'm going to make you money. And I'm going to make your kid great, and that's what you want more than anything else. So hang on, listen to what I've got to say. The chap had the confidence and the understanding that the relationships with other people is the most important thing. Believe me, it is. IQ can get you so far, but it's found with IQ. Any IQ points above 120, and look, it's an IQ quotient, and that means that the average is around 100. That's what a quotient is. That's why it's called an IQ quotient. That's the Q. 120 is certainly well above average, but it's not obscenely high. But if you start to talk about people above that IQ, you find they don't necessarily do that much better for themselves. For every IQ point above 120, the life skills of that person are not going to necessarily be that high, that much higher. In fact, probably not at all. But if you give someone the advantage of socializing them with the expectation that their career, how they relate to other people, is going to affect how they achieve in business, socially, economically, the woman that they're going to marry, the promotions that they're going to have.
It's life skills is what we're talking about.
It's a great thing. And unfortunately, this book Outliers talks about the environment that people grow up in as being one of the most important predicators of whether they're going to succeed or not. Now, this young person who shook my hand and had that confidence didn't grow up in an overly rich family, but grew up in a family that understood how to play the game as rich people will. Let me explain to you. Let's say that we divide society into two halves. Let's say the old-fashioned English upper class and lower class. The people who lived upstairs and rang the bell, and the people from downstairs would come and serve them their cup of tea. Or let's go back to the military example of the enlisted man and the officer.
That's right.
They're expected to act differently. One is expected to be deferential to the other. There's a big difference in the way that rich people or people from society bring up their children from the way that poorer people do. Poorer people, either they might just bow out and not play by the rules at all. And I'm not suggesting that's the case, but it's one option. Another one is to play by what they perceive the rules are, which are to defer to the people in authority. Now, rich people raise their children differently. What they do is they're keenly involved in their children's free time.
Yes.
Listen to what I said. They're keenly involved in their children's free time. If the child is playing violin, it's not thought of, oh, this is, just part of the personality of my child. They've sort of got that quirk that they'll play a bit of violin. No. What they'll understand is this is a way that my child expresses themselves, and it's a talent that the child has that they can develop. And by God, that will be developed. It'll be developed by ensuring that they've got a room to play music. They've got a proper teacher that engages them. And if the teacher's not engaging them, they will actually go to parent-teacher nights and visit the teacher and see why the child's not been engaged. And if necessary, remove that teacher from their life and get another teacher in, or someone who can inspire that child. If they're going, let's say, to see a doctor, they'll be talking to the child in the car on the way there about what is it that you wish to discuss with the doctor? How can we use your time effectively with the doctor? It's not sitting there and receiving the environment or the information from the doctor. It's effectively profiling and getting the best out of the doctor and your time when you're there. Now, this means you're completely transforming the child because you're recognizing their talents. It's not a quirk. It's something which can be developed. Resources put into it as well. Not only that, but the environment. You're changing the environment to the child, and the child knows when they meet a workmate or a boss or a superior at work to confidently look them in the eye and to hold out the hand. You could call IQ, I think, into two different regions. You could say intelligence can be analytical, and that's pretty much what the IQ quotient does, okay? I've gone through some of them. Some of them I've done ridiculously well, but it's talking about analytical intelligence. It's not talking about practical intelligence. And my God,
there is such a huge difference.
The two biggest gifts a person can have in life is practical intelligence, I'm going to explain it to you, and loving other people. If you've got the gift of both of those, you are a very blessed man. If you're handsome and tall as a man as well, you are going to have such a staggeringly good life. If you're a good-looking woman and you grow up from a wealthy background where you're taught how to relate to other people, you are going to have a life which is just basically on cloud nine. Practical intelligence means this. It means knowing what to ask, knowing who to ask it from, and how to ask it.
Yep.
Now, remember how I spoke about the hot housing of people from a wealthy environment, how they're coached to get the best out of the people. The parents will actively be involved with them in what's effectively an interview, in things like if they're joining the local sports team. It's effectively an interview, and they're being taught how to negotiate each one of those initial relationships and the relationships going forward. You know, it's not necessarily important if you're playing sport or something like that to be the strongest or the biggest person there on the team. Michael Jordan was 6'6". I mean, that's very big, but there are taller people than him that are playing on the basketball field who will never achieve what he achieved. If you go into the field of science, you might have an IQ of, say, 125, 130. That's certainly notable, but it's nothing compared to, let's say, Einstein, who had an IQ in the 150s. Or, and we'll talk about Chris Langdon in a sec, currently believed to be one of the smartest men on earth with an IQ of 195. If you look at who's achieving the prizes, who's achieving originality, it's good enough to be just good enough. You see, in things like sport or in science that I've given you examples of, you can really divide people. Instead of a scale from an IQ of 70 up to 200, you could divide them on a scale of not good enough for this activity or good enough. And a lot of people who are winning the Nobel Prizes would go into the category of good enough, but certainly not genius IQ, which is around 150, or super-genius, the levels above that. Because if you're good enough and you've got the passion for what you're doing and you've got an academic environment around you which is being fostered, you can still achieve your dreams and do incredibly well. It's not only the schools like Harvard that are producing the people who are winning these prizes. But
certainly not. No.
let's talk about the advantage that you get, for example, of being wealthy and growing up in the right region. I went for a walk last night. I went past a school in Melbourne, which is a girls-only school. And remember that girls learn better by themselves. Boys learn better with the influence of girls. Girls make people learn better. I think this is really what that means.
What subject are we talking about?
They were talking about an ATAR. That's basically the leaving exam scores. A median, as many people do as well or worse than that score, of 95.24. This is ferociously high. Ferociously. They got there because the expectation is there. And they've also learnt the gamesmanship of how to actually achieve in that area. I've got no doubt these people will do well. But you see again, once these people have qualified and you see how they qualify in life with their incomes, with their job titles, and what life holds for them, again they start to fall into the brackets of they're good enough for that activity they choose or they're not good enough for the activity. So don't lose heart in what you're choosing. If you are good enough and you've got the desire and you surround yourself with other people and that expectation, I've got good news for you. You're probably going to do pretty well. Let's look at Chris Langdon. IQ of 195. He grew up in poverty, and because his mother didn't sign a proper financial record, he was denied the continuance of his scholarship, ended up being kicked out of the university. When he went to talk to his professors about calculus, they believed that he simply wasn't talented enough to do calculus. They said, oh, just lay it on the line. Some people are smart enough to do this and some people aren't. They didn't realise he was talking about the engagement he was getting in calculus.
Yep.
And the fact that he could do calculus and put them under the table with it. We're going back to that practical intelligence. Who do you ask the questions of? How are you asking it and why are you asking it? And is it leading you to the result that you wanted? And then you've got other people like Oppenheimer. Did you end up seeing the movie Oppenheimer?
No, I don't believe I did. I mean, I know of him. I know what he...
Well, it's one of those great guy movies. You'll be able to maybe have a couple of cigars while you're watching it. It's one of those long films, but it's great. Oppenheimer was a genius. Just was. He was a genius like Chris Langdon. He did things differently. He tried to poison one of his professors and it was discovered. But again, if you're growing up in an environment where you've got middle class, wealthy class background and you know people who can help you negotiate the practical intelligence, you can still achieve great things. You know, they say it's basically orthogonal, the difference between your analytical IQ and your practical intelligence. You know, they go at right angles. One doesn't necessarily have any correlation on the other at all. It gave me some hope reading this book because I always wondered what it is that make people great. There are no people who are truly brilliant at the start. The brilliance is something which is fostered through the economic environment. You can't be a great musician if you don't have the support behind you. With Paul McCartney, his father was a jazz musician. He had a jazz band. He had someone he could feed off. And he had a home environment where he could actually practice and play. He went to an artistic school. And then he had the crucible of the 1200 hours before they were let loose and started the shock and awe of the British invasion in 1964. These things are possible. If you can bring your family up to look someone in the eye, give them a heartfelt handshake and talk to them on a sort of peer level, even if they're feeling insecure at a young age, you have truly set that person up for greatness.
There's this big pregnant pause here. I don't know what to say. But I do agree with that. That actually makes a lot of sense.
If you like what you see and you think you're learning from Sociology, like, share, subscribe, put your comments down below and join us for more adventures. You'll see more of Gunnar regularly.
We'll catch you on the next one.